priorities were for 2007-8 that had been carried over from the prior year or that had been added in that year's budget. That's the next slide. And then what priorities were for 2008-2009. So, you know, this is kind of a reminder of what it was that we've carried forward. And then we talked about new county budget priorities, and that at this point in time we're going into the proposed budget without new county budget priorities. Doesn't mean that's not going to get addressed at some point, but we're not going into the proposed budget assuming that we're adding in any new priorities, because actually we're kind of going in the opposite direction. And then the budget guidelines, and we did have discussions about these, but I thought I'd just use the language as it was in the previous presentation so that nobody was comparing them and saying, oh, well, this changed. But we are, the one that people had some concerns about was number 2. We are going to adhere to the debt reduction policy, but the whole issue of any additional revenues going first to debt reduction, obviously, that's open to discussion. But talked about budget guidelines there and what we might be doing with trimming and restructure. And you'll see a number of these reflected in the budget instructions, where we said up front to people, don't count on the county backfilling state cuts. And that's reflected here. And then we will certainly look at revenue enhancements, although some of those can't be done in the same time as the proposed budget, but it might be something that the board wants to give direction for further exploration. So that's how the, I'll call them budget assumptions and kind of budget guidelines or priorities have kind of informed our process, and they are reflected in the budget instructions. They will be reflected in the proposed budget that comes to you, and the point at which the board weighs in is in that review of the proposed budget, as well very clearly in the final budget, where all of those assumptions and priorities are open for discussion. As far as the issue of taking action now on anything specific, the executive office is working from another assumption that things are too fluid right now, particularly with the state budget, to take specific actions in advance of the proposed budget. We feel that having put department heads on notice with that executive direction and asking them to address this through increased fund balance and preparing for next year is the most appropriate action that we can take. And the other thing to point out is that Mendocino County actually has in place a system for reviewing filling vacant positions. It was never rescinded the last time a hiring freeze was put in place. And so that system is already in place. We've already been operating under it. So if we need to, because we get information through the budget process or anything else, if we need to shift gears and not approving filling certain vacancies, we're in a position to do that. Right now, as I said, it's a discussion with department heads that if it's something that you can delay filling or you don't feel needs to be filled, by all means, take that action yourself. Don't send us a request to fill. And that's how we're dealing with it. If there's something that comes across my desk that I kind of wonder about, then I can pick up the phone and call a department head and say, okay, you know, give me more information. But at this point, we have the system in place, and it could be activated if we wanted to. So that's the role of assumptions. Final thing here is what are our next steps. The budget conferences are the last week in April. The governor's May revise for the state budget will come out at the beginning of May, and then we will have the May budget workshop at the end of May, and at that point we will have more definitive information, although not, I'm sure, final information on the state budget, and we'll have the results of all the budget conferences, and we'll have a pretty good idea of what the gap might be between, you know, the ideal budget or the uncut budget and what we project at that point our revenues to be. So that May budget workshop will deal with kind of large-scale issues, and then at the June budget workshop, that's when we go over kind of line by line the proposed budget. So we're building it incrementally. So are there any questions about the rest of this process?
To the board, any questions, concerns, or opinions?
Okay.
All right.
Then the next step in today's meeting are the fee hearings, and I'll let you proceed with them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Before we move on to that, is there any public expression in regards to the building of the budget as previously discussed? Okay, seeing none, we'll move ahead. Two of the timed item at 1:30, we have a notice public hearing for discussion and possible action, including approval of proposed fee modifications for the 2008 master fee schedule for departments referenced in Exhibit A, to the CEO's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, I'm going to provide some oversight as we get started. Then I'll be turning some time over to our budget officer, Jennifer Wyatt, who will talk some more about the process. And then finally, individual departments will be coming up and making their presentations to the board and justifying their requests for fee increases. This has been an interesting process to try and establish this master fee schedule that now resides. If you go to the CEO's office on the county website, you'll see on the far left side there is a master fee schedule that you can click on, and all of the county fees are listed. I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because as we originally started this process, I felt that we'd be able to gather up all of the county fees, have them all in one distinct location. That turned out to be a little more of a challenge than I thought, and I still encounter fees that are out there that are not necessarily detailed out on the master fee schedule. There may be fees that are being charged by departments under some other authority, whether it be by state code or by some form of legislation. So I wanted to start off with a caveat that I don't think we've encompassed every single fee that is being charged by county departments, but it is our goal still to get all of those fees captured. In a conversation I had this morning with Jennifer, she reminded me that we did adopt a policy that we would try and get to your board no more than twice a year with fee schedule revisions. In my mind, I think we're going to probably sometime, I would suspect late summer, come back to you as we know some more, for instance, about where we are with the out-of-market adjustment with our employee raises and the other costs that are sort of floating out there with fuel costs and et cetera. So we will probably come back to your board one additional time to adjust our fees in accordance with what our current costs are for both supplies as well as for labor costs. Other anomalies come up during this process. For instance, we just within the last week or so rolled out our replacement of approximately 85 copiers throughout the entire county. As part of that structure, we do have a fee for copiers, but we now have the ability in some instances to deliver color copies of things. So our current fee schedule only encompasses, I believe it's 10 cents a copy for black and white, but if someone obviously wants a color copy, we'll need to establish a fee for the color copies, whether it might be a photograph or some other document that's better read in color. Those are the kind of corrections that need to be made. Also, the sheriff and I have been having discussions regarding the zip tie program. In our office, it does not think it's appropriate to move forward with the zip tie program at this point in time. It is a fee that we would